More bad news regarding the Suns' culture and workplace coming today as a longtime executive resigns and sends a very, very pointed email illustrating the ongoing problems amid what has now become a 7-month investigation into the organization by the NBA. We'll talk about what happened and what it means on today's episode of Locked On.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 5 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen today and every day. Keep telling you guys the news is not slowing down. There is just too much, frankly, going on with this team right now. So if you are finding us on your favorite podcast platform, go ahead and hit follow, hit subscribe. Make sure you do not miss us in your feed every day. If you're finding us on YouTube, that is the best way to support the show. Hit that subscribe button down below and then drop me a comment letting me know what you think of this whole mess. And I do think that it's fair to call it that at this point. Today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered all year long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, so Baxter Holmes, who has been on the case all from the jump. His story back in November was the impetus for the NBA and launching an investigation into the Suns. It was rumored about a month before that. We all know how this has all gone. And he has covered individual steps along that timeline as well, including the number of people that have been interviewed for the investigation, some of the invasive treatment of the witnesses that Robert Sarver's wife got into, all of that stuff. And here is the latest piece of news. A woman named Melissa Fender Panagiotopoulos, if I'm saying that right, I'm sure I'm not, quit the franchise on May 20th. She had worked for the Suns since she left college, if I'm doing the math correctly, in 2007. Since 2014, April of 2014, she had been the Senior Premium Experience Manager, which is basically a fancy word for I handle the highest level sales that we do in terms of tickets, suites, courtside, all that good stuff, dealing with the primo and customers of the Suns on the ticketing side. She sent an email to senior management as well as the lead HR representative for the franchise when she left. She had also sent a previous memo about a week after Baxter Holmes' original story in November had been published. In this resignation letter, she referenced that first memo, according to Baxter's story, and wrote, quote, since that confidential interaction with senior leadership, HR, and legal, there has been a consistent retaliation and bullying by my direct leadership. So after she wrote the memo responding to the ESPN story back in November, she claims that in the 6 or so months after that, she was retaliated against and bullied by her direct leadership. She goes on to write in this resignation letter that Baxter was able to get hold of, that the Suns organization, quote, has never been more dysfunctional and the culture is rapidly eroding. She also wrote, quote, my job has grown more intolerable and toxic than ever. The allegations included in the letter that Holmes was able to, again, get and post large parts of in this latest story include allegations of HR mismanagement and what I would think feels a lot like potential fraud among senior executives. So we will get into the specifics of each of those portions because I think those are the big ones. But where does this leave us? I think is a reasonable question to ask. I have said prior to this, and I feel the same, that the report, based upon the NBA's ongoing investigation, will be released this month. That is my assumption. You have heard, if you listen to Bill Simmons' podcast over at The Ringer, multiple references to this thing coming out soon. I think some of that is informed speculation. I don't think it's fully reported from Bill, but I also don't think that it's just him spitballing. It also lines up from a timeline standpoint. The NBA would not want to color and stick out from the finals. They want that to be their premier product. They want the basketball to shine. And they don't have a lot of time before everything else happens. We know the finals are going 6 games. If they were to go 7 games, then game 7 would be this Sunday. The draft is next Thursday. So I've been pinpointing sometime early next week, basically Monday, Tuesday next week. They might hope, okay, the games are done. We got our ratings. We have made our television partners and our advertisers happy. And then hopefully this will blow over by the time the draft comes. I don't think any of that is necessarily true, but I guess I understand the strategy around it and waiting for the Sun season to be over, if indeed it is as big, and it feels like it is, as we maybe worry. So the NBA just can't have this stretch out over another season, and they need to give the Suns time to adjust once the findings are out before the offseason changes take place. I mean, you even saw today, the Suns hired an assistant coach. That type of stuff, there's no waiting on that. It has to happen, and the NBA can't keep the team in limbo. This is why it was crazy all along to me, and I mentioned this multiple times throughout the season, that the Suns were forging ahead as if nothing had happened. You just think about the big moves that they've made in different roles. They have been hiring tons of people. They are making changes in the Mercury coaching situation. They are, everything. I mean, there's no time or season where you don't make big decisions as a pro sports team, but they have been very business as usual, and it has been very surprising, even down to a guy like Jason Rowley, who was named specifically in the initial Baxter Holmes story back in November, has been public facing. While Robert Sarver has largely been in the shadows, he didn't even sit in his seats for most of the season, and during the playoffs and whatnot, you were hard pressed to even find him. Jason Rowley's been out there center court doing, glad handing different people as part of game day activations and things like that, and as if he's not wrapped up in this whole thing. It's been very bizarre. It has come across as very cocky and prideful to not be in the shadows as this stuff happens. I understand it was a very successful season, but this resignation by this senior premium experience manager indicates that this stuff did not go away as much as the Suns might have publicly given the impression that it had. Let's move on to the HR angle, because I think that is the big one. It was always the part that I had focused on because it felt like it carried the most weight. We'll break down what is new here and compare it to what was originally said in the first story that also included a lot about HR. First, though, guys, today's show brought to you by PrizePicks. If you are a diehard fantasy player but don't love the routine, the brokenness of daily fantasy in the NBA, well, check out PrizePicks. We love PrizePicks here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and we know you all will too. Here's how it works. 2 to 5 players in your lineup and an over or an under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the projections. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less, and PrizePicks offers safe and fast withdrawals. You pick any prop you could think of, from points scored to rebounds, even steals. And PrizePicks also allows mixed sport entries, meaning that you can select, let's say, over on Jason Tatum points, but maybe you go under on, I don't know what a hockey prop is because I am not a hockey guy, but you take a player in the Stanley Cup Finals and you say under on goals. Maybe it's 0.5 for the best goal scorer on each team, and you say under. If you're expecting a hard-fought game, that's it. You can do that, or maybe you just stay in the NBA and you say over on points for Tatum, over on points for Curry, and that's your lineup. For a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer offer for all Locked On listeners. Users will get $50 free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point when you use the code NBA. That's right, an exclusive offer available only for Locked On listeners who sign up today using the code NBA to get $50 free if, and of course when, a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. Continuing on here, again, Melissa Fender Panagiotakopoulos, there we go, resigned last month, and now news coming out not only of her resignation, but of the details of her resignation letter, which was made public, released to Baxter Holmes over at ESPN. Here is what Melissa wrote in that resignation letter on May 20th. That is new information for us. Two particular points here that I want to hit on. One, quote, she also alleged inequities and gender discrimination, writing, "Is it a coincidence that I have been the only mother in the entire sales organization for the last 15 years? Is it because certain males are being paid more in equivalent roles?" Then the next part of Baxter's story, quote, and she alleged issues with human resources, quote, ability to stay relevant and exert influence over C-suites, as in senior leadership, the lack of follow-up, ability to resolve conflict, or true concern for employee well-being. Now, one part of that is obviously pay gap, gender discrimination, those things. She's not necessarily saying that she escalated any of that to HR and was rebuffed, but obviously that is an HR issue if men are being overcompensated and women in the workplace are not content with that. That is an HR issue, even if she doesn't frame it that way. And then the second part, she specifically discusses HR in particular, ability to stay relevant and exert influence over senior leadership, and the lack of ability to resolve conflict or true concern for employee well-being. To me, I don't know about you guys, that sounds exactly like the entire point of what a human resources department is supposed to do. So if a human resources department is displaying a lack of concern for employee well-being, that is pretty darn bad. Goes without saying very clearly, but I think this did not get enough attention the first time around. So let me run through briefly some of the points made in the initial ESPN story back in November regarding HR. Here is the main story from that piece. One former employee said that after being physically assaulted by a male coworker outside of the office, physically assaulted, let me just emphasize that for all of you, a female coworker went to HR out of concern for the employee's safety. The two told ESPN that HR spoke with the alleged victim, ultimately deciding that simply moving her desk would resolve the issue. At that time, the alleged victim said there were two rows of desks with partitions separating each one, and that hers was right next to the male coworkers. They moved her to the second row. Quote, I couldn't escape, she said, adding that if she stood up, he was right there, probably less than 10 feet away. As far as the employee is aware, there was no investigation, Baxter wrote at the time. He continued, the Suns told ESPN that they could take no action because both employees declined to speak with HR and because neither employee expressed an interest in having the Suns intervene concerning the dispute. The Suns denied ever instructing, quote, either employee to move their desk to resolve the domestic issue they were having. In all, 3 people told ESPN the employee's desk location had indeed been moved. A number of employees, especially women, described to ESPN being subjected to or witnessing verbal barrages from male executives. There is so much more here. Public examples of mistreatment and disregard. Female employees reported inappropriate comments by managers. One female former sales employee said a former Suns vice president who appeared to be intoxicated asked her how many members of her department she had slept with and about one specific coworker's penis. Okay? I don't believe that it's great to hear that stuff. Apologies if any children are in the car or anything like that. I should have said so ahead of time. But I'm reading the direct report, and it is that vivid for a reason. This is the type of thing that people had to deal with in the Suns organization as employees day to day. Again, I do not think that this ever got enough attention in the first place. I am far from the type of person who is going to minimize the stories from Earl Watson or others. I believe Corliss Williamson was also on the record talking about the racist treatment that he received during his time as a Suns assistant coach. Earl Watson, as the head coach, talks about hearing the N-word about a player and challenging Robert Sarver and being told that Robert Sarver basically saying that Watson was out of place to challenge him on the use of that type of language. I think this could explain part of why the investigation has drawn out so long, and let me tell you why. It's a lot different if the NBA is just basically sorting out proper punishment for an owner, looking at past precedent. Okay, is the suspension going to be this long? Do we fine the organization? Do we try to force a sale? Do we anything? Do we put this to a vote? That all is not easy, not simple, and definitely don't want to take the significance out of what that might do, because he is the figurehead. He is the main point person and leader of all of this. But that would be one thing. This is seemingly has turned into trying to basically develop a plan to almost rescue the culture and the operations of franchise that has been for decade at least. I mean, Sarver has had the team now for 18 years. I don't know when these issues got particularly bad, but even if you just go back to April of 2014, when this woman entered her current role and starts to claim some of these issues, or even back to, let's say it's 5 years, whatever it has been, it is a pattern at this point of mismanagement, with people suffering legitimate, genuine, long-term damage to their careers and their lives. That is what this investigation seems to have bloomed into. And it's understandable that the NBA would want to take care and take time to get that right. That it's fairly unprecedented. I mean, I guess you could use the crude analogy basically of it's the Mavericks front office or business operations sexual harassment stuff combined with Donald Sterling in a way, right? In terms of precedent, in terms of where we would look, where the NBA itself would look when they're thinking about doling out punishment, it's all of that. And they, as the caretakers of these individual franchises, the league office and its employees, its own staff at the league level, it becomes an imperative for them to figure it the heck out. Like there's part of me, while I'm even saying that I understand the delays, there's part of me that feels like we are allowing 7 months to go by with these people being mistreated. And in some cases, I mean, like I'll quote the resignation letter. She says that she was bullied, consistent retaliation and bullying by my direct leadership. Now, she seems to be somebody who was trying to make change and make a difference and speak out. And so maybe the retaliation was unique in some ways to her, but this is a toxic situation and the NBA needs to save it. They've waited long enough. I think it needs to come out as soon as it possibly can, but you also understand why it wasn't just the next week they had something to say. The NBA can paper over hearsay, quote unquote, about Robert Sarver, try to move past it. I think a lot of owners have been accused of being pretty unsensitive and hateful dudes in the past, but they cannot ignore multiple credible claims of HR negligence in a hostile workplace. They can't. They also cannot ignore the money part of all of this. So that's what we'll hit next. First, today's show, guys, again, brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline, your number one source for all of the sports betting stats and info that you need all year long. More props, odds, and lines than ever before as they continue to bulk up the offerings over at BetOnline. Here was a fun one that we had some fun with over on the NBA group chat we have at Locked On. NBA 2K23 cover athlete. It felt very obvious when I first saw the odds. John Morant at plus 150 seems like a no-brainer, but Jason Tatum at plus 400. That is pretty juicy there. And you have Steph Curry plus 450. I don't think that doesn't seem possible. Maybe he has been on the cover. Then you have a Suns connection here, plus 3,300 for Mr. Devin Booker. BetOnline, your continued source for all sports wagering info, including live betting, esports, every single pro league, as well as fun props like NBA 2K23 cover athlete. So head to the website today or use mobile device to learn more about the latest trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Lots of pieces of this resignation letter, lots of pieces of this original story, and it can be hard to sift through all of it. But I talked about the HR part. I swear to you guys, that has felt to me the entire process like something that was not talked about enough. But one thing that will get talked about undoubtedly, if it is a part of anything going on with the Suns, whether it was something the NBA found quietly or if more reporting like this continues to come out, is money. I'll get into the precedent and the history. I want to just quote the resignation letter from Melissa Fender Panagiotopoulos first. Quote, inherent conflicts of interest with managers' ability to receive commissions, cherry pick deals, revise suite lease terms to line their own pockets, and operate in a different manner than the rest of the sales organization with no true consistent systems or oversight. That's bad. Inherent conflicts of interest with managers' ability to receive commissions, cherry pick deals, revise suite lease terms to line their own pockets, and operate in a different manner than the rest of the sales organization with no true consistent systems or oversight. Fraud. I mean, if that is something that was happening, and you would feel like if a woman has been in place for 8 years, if an employee, a leader, has been in place at the top of this chain of command loosely for 8 years and is seeing other managers act in this way, it sounds like fraud. I mean, I know that's a deep team. I am no lawyer. I am not trying to say that this is what happened, that I know what would be any sort of charge or predict what's going to be in the official report on any of this. I'm just saying that sounds like high-level people in the sales department, which is the main place where money moves in a sports organization, using their place in things and the control over pricing and commissions and rates and lease terms to make money and up the perception of themselves. That cannot happen. It cannot happen in any company. It cannot happen in a company that is so. It can't happen in any company. I get this isn't a publicly traded company, but you cannot have businesses operating that way with how many employees they have, with how much of a place they hold in a community. It's beyond disgusting that something like that would be happening. Not to mention all of the actual hateful language and treatment of people, but this is it's just pathetic. It's just plain, it's just things that would have, if this is true, these are things that would have just been happening in plain sight, just blatant. Everybody sees these numbers. There's an accountant down the road who has accounts receivable and is assigned to the account for X, Y, or Z suite and sees the money and where it's going and what's going on. And it just seemingly didn't matter. This demands action from the NBA. And as gross as it is to try to put the money stuff over the top, that is what history tells us happens. And we can have a separate conversation someday about the money in sports and how much of it there should be, how much of it there is, and on and on. That's its own topic. The bottom line is that there is a bottom line that matters a great deal to these people when you're talking about billion-dollar organizations and you're talking about executives who make millions and players who make millions and everything that a sports team is. Donald Sterling had settled 3 times in racism lawsuits of different sorts, including redlining and housing discrimination or the employment and termination of Elgin Baylor, before TMZ finally leaked audio of him not only using the racist language we all heard in those news reports, but talking about who should be able to come to attend, be featured at Clippers games. If you remember, it was his mistress that he was telling not to bring anybody but white guys to the games because they were going to be featured courtside, they were going to be seen on screen, and that he didn't want them as his customers. Well, guess what, Donald? They are your customers. And once that came out, you got to give the players an immense amount of credit, and I don't take anything away from the pressure that they were able to exert on the NBA to make a change that they wanted to see happen, but it became damaging to the bottom line and the financial image of the NBA. Over the 21st century, it just had gotten worse and worse with Sterling, and this was him basically publicly saying what the lawsuits had told us he was doing all along, and that's when you saw change happen, in addition to the players, again. Reportedly, in the NFL right now, you have momentum around Daniel Snyder from the Washington Commanders, finally getting nixed. Not because of any of the awful stuff that he's done in the past, not because of how poorly that organization has been run, executives being inappropriate with reporters, not changing the nickname, the stadium being disgusting, and on and on and on and on and on. None of that. It is because he allegedly lied on his books, and that resulted in a lowered amount of money being distributed in terms of the revenue sharing to other teams. Now you're seeing Daniel Snyder might finally leave. On the other end, you have cases, I don't even know if people remember this happened. Donnie Nelson, the former longtime general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, sued the Dallas Mavericks and Mark Cuban, alleging that Nelson, was offered $52 million in what basically amounts to alleged hush money after Nelson says that Jason Luton, who is the chief of staff of Mark Cuban, sexually harassed and assaulted Nelson's nephew during a job interview. Mind you, Jason Luton was at the Suns Arena during the playoffs. I saw him. He's at every game. No problem yet. Hasn't gone to trial or any of that stuff yet, but no problem, really. Chargers owners, the Spanos family, sued the owner and his brother, I think, sued over the weekend for discriminatory practices, and it barely made headlines, sued by their sister. Last year, or maybe early this year, Jerry Jones, it comes out that he allegedly has a secret daughter that he has been paying to help her existence along since she was born. The Cowboys were sued over the team fixer allegedly mistreating cheerleaders for years. Neither of these things made much of a dent at all. Trouble that affects the league's bottom lines will always, always, always make waves in the league office and among other owners. So this money thing, to me, I don't personally really care. I sort of assume that corporate weirdos are the ones getting sweets. It doesn't really change my mind. I think that it's a little bit gross that the people who were being allegedly paid more, according to Melissa, were also the ones acting this way. If her male counterparts were the ones who were being paid much higher than her for no reason, according to her, and they were the ones acting inappropriately, that's problematic. That's not something that I think should be happening, and I don't think it should be happening at all, but it's not my money. The league will care, though, and that and the HR thing, I think, are just going to be undeniable for the league, and it explains why things have dragged on. It explains why this has become such a big deal, and I guess it leads us to need to brace for what could be a fairly sizable bombshell of a thing when this finally does arrive on our doors, because I understand a lot of Suns fans were just rooting for the owner thing to change over. I don't know how much of this body of people will survive this, between people being punished, removed, or quitting. It's going to get ugly is what it feels like, and it has been ugly. It's a worse before it gets better type of situation from the sound of it, but we just need to be prepared for that as people who care about this franchise and want to continue to follow something closer to a healthy version of it. That'll do it for today, guys. Back the rest of the week. Aaron Edwards will be here later on, so do not go anywhere. More Ayton rumors, more draft rumors. The free agency stuff and off-season stuff is not going anywhere, even as this whole craziness looms. So hit subscribe, hit follow. A big thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen today and every day, of course. But now go make Locked On NBA Big Board your second listen to keep up with all things draft heading toward next Thursday.